In a breathtaking twist that defies all expectations, a 10-year-old boy approaches the legendary Clint Eastwood at a diner and asks for his help. What he does next changes lives forever, leaving everyone in awe of the transformation that unfolds. The sky was a bruised purple when Annie stepped onto the ledge of the Hartwick Bridge. 37 stories below, the river glinted like shattered glass in the fading light. Her hands trembled as she gripped the railing behind her, knuckles white against the rusted metal. Everything she owned was neatly packed in labeled boxes. In her apartment, the keys left with the building manager alongside an envelope of instructions. She'd planned this moment for weeks. The late autumn wind whipped her copper hair across her face, stinging her eyes already raw from crying. At 42, she'd become an expert at silent tears, at breaking apart without making a sound. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you are watching us from. We continue. Miss, please step back. The voice startled her. Eliza turned her head slightly, careful not to lose her footing. A man in a security guard uniform stood 10 feet away, hand outstretched. Clint Eastwood, according to his nameplate. Late 20s, with kind eyes that reminded her of someone. "Please don't come any closer," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I won't," he promised, remaining perfectly still. "But I'd really like to talk to you." Eliza laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "There's nothing to talk about." "I think there is." His voice was gentle, like he was speaking to a frightened animal. "My shift ends in 20 minutes. I was going to grab coffee at that diner across the street. Would you join me?" "Why would you want that?" The question escaped before she could catch it. "Because no one should be alone when they're hurting this bad." A siren wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police. Soon there would be flashing lights, a crowd, the spectacle she had desperately wanted to avoid. "They're coming," James said quietly. "Once they get here, this all gets a lot more complicated." Eliza closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the small wooden box in her coat pocket. Inside was the only thing she hadn't packed away, a small silver charm bracelet with a single bird pendant. The irony wasn't lost on her, clutching a symbol of freedom while feeling utterly trapped. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Do what?" "Pretend." The word hung between them like a confession. "Pretend that I'm okay. Pretend that what happened didn't break something inside me." "What happened?" James asked, taking one cautious step forward. The flashing lights appeared at the end of the bridge, and something inside Eliza snapped. In one swift motion, she turned and reached for his outstretched hand. Their fingers connected, and James pulled her firmly away from the ledge, guiding her to the solid concrete of the pedestrian walkway just as the first police car screeched to a halt. As the officers approached, James kept his hand on her elbow, a steady presence beside her. "What did you say your name was?" Eliza asked, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "James Chen. I work security here 3 nights a week." "What do you do the rest of the time?" He hesitated, then answered simply, "I volunteer at the Hartwick Center for Trauma Recovery." Eliza's knees nearly buckled beneath her. Of all the bridges in the city, of all the security guards who could have been working that night, she'd chosen the one patrolled by someone from the very place she'd been avoiding for the past 11 months. "That can't be a coincidence," she murmured. "What's that?" But Eliza just shook her head as the police officers surrounded them, their questions already beginning like a wave she couldn't outrun. 11 months earlier, Eliza Morgan had been Dr. Annie, the youngest department head at Kessler Medical Center, specializing in emergency pediatric medicine. Her colleagues described her as brilliant, focused, and unflappable. Nurses fought to work on her team, residents competed for her mentorship, and parents specifically requested her care for their children. What no one saw was how she carried the weight of each case home with her, how she lay awake reciting treatment protocols and second-guessing decisions. No one knew about the journal she kept of every patient she couldn't save, their names, ages, and what she believed she could have done differently. No one except Dr. Tommy, her colleague and the only person who had managed to scale the walls she'd built around herself. At 45, Nathan was divorced with a teenage daughter, Ramirez. He understood the demands of their profession in a way no one else in Eliza's life ever had. "Now, you can't save everyone," he told her one night as they sat in the hospital cafeteria at 3 a.m., both coming off 30-hour shifts. "That's the first thing they should teach in medical school. Instead, they teach us that failure is not an option," Eliza replied, stirring her cold coffee. "That's why doctors make terrible patients and even worse partners." He smiled ruefully, and Eliza felt something shift between them. Their relationship evolved slowly. Coffee breaks extended to dinners, which led to weekend hikes, and eventually to Nathan and Sophia becoming the family Eliza had never allowed herself to want. Sophia, 15 and whip-smart, reminded Eliza of herself at that age, intense, driven, and hiding vulnerability beneath a veneer of confidence. "She likes you," Nathan said one evening as they watched Sophia practicing violin in the living room of his modest suburban home. "She doesn't let just anyone hear her play." "I like her too," Eliza admitted, surprising herself with how true it was. "I like all of this." Nathan took her hand, his expression serious. "Move in with us." The offer hung between them, tantalizing and terrifying. It represented everything Eliza had convinced herself she couldn't have: a life beyond the hospital, people to come home to, a reason to leave work on time. "I'll think about it," she said, buying time she didn't need. In her heart, she had already decided. 2 weeks later, Eliza was packing books into boxes when her phone rang. The hospital number flashed on the screen, and she felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Emergency calls never brought good news. "Dr. Morgan," she answered, already reaching for her keys. The voice on the other end was tense. "Multiple vehicle pile-up on the highway. We need all hands, at least 15 critical, including children." "I'm on my way." As she drove through the rainy night, Eliza had no way of knowing that among the mangled vehicles on that highway were Nathan's sedan and his ex-wife's SUV. No way of knowing that he had been driving Sophia home from a violin recital when a semi-truck jackknifed across 3 lanes. The next hours blurred together. Triage tags, shouted orders, the controlled chaos of an emergency department pushed beyond capacity. Eliza moved from patient to patient, her training overriding the exhaustion, until a nurse grabbed her arm. "Dr. Morgan, you need to come with me." Eliza followed, assuming another critical case needed her attention. Instead, she was led to trauma. Room 3, where a team worked frantically around a gurney. It took her a moment to recognize the unconscious form of Nathan, his face obscured by an oxygen mask, his chest exposed as a resident performed CPR. "No," she whispered, frozen in the doorway. "Dr. Morgan, you can't be in here," someone said, trying to guide her away. "Where's Sophia?" Eliza demanded. "Nathan's daughter, 15, red hair, where is she?" The look on the nurse's face told her everything. Eliza broke away, racing through the department until she found Sophia in trauma room 5, already draped. With a white sheet, her violin case somehow intact beside the gurney. Something inside Eliza shattered in that moment. She returned to Nathan's room just as the attending called time of death. No one stopped her as she approached the gurney and placed her hand over Nathan's still warm one. "I was going to say yes," she told him, her voice breaking. "I was packing to move in with you both." The weight of those words, of opportunities lost and futures erased, would haunt her for months to come, pushing her step by step toward the ledge of the Hartwick Bridge. The fluorescent lights of the hospital's psychiatric ward hummed quietly as Eliza sat on the edge of a narrow bed, staring at the blank walls. The 72-hour hold felt both punitive and pointless. She had no intention of attempting suicide again, at least not where someone could intervene. A knock at the door preceded the entrance of a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and clear blue eyes. Dr. Arizona, according to her ID badge. "Dr. Morgan," she greeted, taking a seat in the visitor's chair. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I'm being punished for inefficiency," Eliza replied flatly. Dr. Tanner's expression remained neutral. "Inefficiency? If I'd been more thorough in my planning, we wouldn't be having this conversation." "I see." Dr. Tanner made a note in her file. "The security guard who found you, Mr. Chen, has requested to visit." Would you like to see him? Eliza's first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity overrode her reluctance. Why would he want to see me? You could ask him yourself. 20 minutes later, James Chen entered the room out of uniform and carrying a small paper bag. I brought you something, he said, placing the bag on the bedside table. The coffee I promised you. It's probably cold by now. The unexpected kindness caught Eliza off guard. Thank you, but you didn't have to. I know. He hesitated before continuing. I volunteer at the Hartwick Center, working with trauma survivors. Something you said on the bridge about pretending to be okay when you're not. That resonated with me. Why? The question came out more defensively than she intended. Because I spent years doing the same thing. James ran a hand through his dark hair. My sister died by suicide when I was in college. I found her. For years afterward, I smiled and told everyone I was fine, right up until I almost wasn't. Eliza studied him, recognizing the shadow behind his eyes, the same one she saw in the mirror. What changed for you? I stopped being alone with it. Started talking about what happened, first at Hartwick, then as a volunteer. It didn't fix everything, but it made the weight bearable. He paused. The center has a support group specifically for people who've lost loved ones suddenly. When you get out of here, maybe you'd consider coming. Something that had been knotted tightly in Eliza's chest loosened slightly. I don't think I can talk about them yet. You don't have to talk. You can just listen. James stood to leave. Think about it. Open invitation. After he left, Eliza reached for the paper bag. Inside was a coffee cup with a handwritten note on the side. When you're ready, Tuesday nights at 7, James. The following weeks passed in a fog. Eliza took a leave of absence from the hospital, attended mandatory therapy sessions, and existed in the empty apartment she had once been so eager to leave. The boxes she'd packed remained untouched, a monument to plans that would never materialize. On the third Tuesday after her discharge, Eliza found herself standing outside the Hartwick Center, the coffee cup with James's note clutched in her hand. She had almost convinced herself to leave when the door opened and James stepped out. I was just heading home, he said, clearly surprised to see her. We finished about 20 minutes ago. I've been standing here for an hour, Eliza admitted. I couldn't make myself go in. James nodded in understanding. First step's the hardest. Want to try again next week? I could meet you outside. I'd like that. The words felt foreign in her mouth, an acknowledgement of wanting something, anything, after months of emotional numbness. Over the following months, Eliza became a silent fixture at the Tuesday night support group, listening as others shared stories of loss and survival. James always saved her a seat, never pushing her to participate but acknowledging her presence with a small nod that somehow said, I see you, and your being here matters. It was at one of these meetings that she first saw Texas, a striking woman in her 30s, whose composed demeanor cracked only when she spoke about her 6-year-old son, lost to a rare form of leukemia. Something about Rebecca's grief, the way she contained it in public while clearly drowning in private, mirrored Eliza's own experience. After the session, Eliza approached her. I'm a pediatric emergency physician, she said by way of introduction. Or I was. Rebecca studied her with tired eyes. Did you know my son? Were you one of his doctors? No, Eliza shook her head, but I lost someone too, someone I loved. The simple admission, the first time she had acknowledged Nathan and Sophia aloud to a stranger, felt monumental. Rebecca's expression softened. It never goes away, does it? The wondering if you could have done something differently. No, Eliza agreed, it doesn't. As spring turned to summer, Eliza found herself returning to the hospital, not to work, but to visit the memorial garden where a plaque bearing Nathan's name had been installed. She brought flowers weekly, sitting on a bench nearby and sometimes speaking to him quietly about the support group, about her tentative steps back toward the living. It was during one of these visits that Dr. Miranda Chen, the hospital's chief of surgery, found her. We miss you in PD, Miranda said, sitting beside her. The department isn't the same without you. I can't go back, Eliza replied, running her fingers over the cool metal of Sophia's charm bracelet, which she now wore daily. Not to emergency medicine. What about teaching? We're expanding our resident training program. Could use someone with your experience. The offer was unexpected, a doorway back into a world Eliza had convinced herself she'd left forever. "I'll think about it," she said, echoing the words she'd once said to Nathan about moving in. This time she meant them. The amphitheater-style classroom was filled with third-year residents when Eliza stepped behind the podium for her first lecture. As an attending physician in the teaching program, her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her notes, but her voice remained steady as she addressed the room. Medicine teaches us to distance ourselves from death, to see it as a failure to be avoided rather than an inevitability to be faced with compassion. Today, we're going to challenge that perspective. From the back of the room, James offered an encouraging nod. Their friendship had evolved over the past year, built on shared understanding and quiet support. He'd started taking classes toward a degree in counseling, inspired by his volunteer work, and often attended Eliza's lectures during his lunch breaks. After class, they walked together to the hospital cafeteria, their routine now comfortingly familiar. "That was a powerful lecture," James commented as they found their usual table by the window. "Especially the part about how avoiding our own grief can make us less effective doctors." "I'm living proof of that theory," Eliza said, stirring her coffee absently. "For years I thought emotional detachment made me a better physician. Now I wonder how many families I failed because I was too afraid to truly see their pain." "You're being too hard on yourself." "Maybe." She hesitated, then reached into her bag to retrieve a small wooden box. "I have something to show you." Inside, the box was a collection of handwritten notes, dozens of them, folded and creased from repeated readings. "What are these?" James asked, carefully unfolding one that read, "Dr. Morgan, you saved my daughter's life last year. She just graduated high school. Thank you for giving us that moment. Letters from families of patients I treated. Some I saved, some I couldn't." Eliza's voice was quiet. "Nathan collected them for years without telling me. After he died, his ex-wife found them in his office and gave them to me." "Why did he keep them?" "He said I needed reminders that even on our worst days we make a difference." She blinked back tears. "I found these again when I was unpacking those boxes I never moved to his house." James reached across the table to squeeze her hand. He was right. The moment was interrupted by Eliza's pager. She checked it and stood quickly. "I need to go. There's a situation in the ER." "Go," James nodded. "I'll see you Tuesday." Eliza hurried through the hospital corridors, following the sound of commotion to Trauma Room 1, where a team was working frantically around a gurney. For a moment, she was transported back to the night Nathan died, paralyzed by the memory. Then, voice cut through her panic. "Dr. Morgan, I need your expertise here." Dr. Rebecca Winters, who had recently joined the emergency department, beckoned her inside. The patient was a teenage girl, approximately 15, with severe injuries from a fall. As Eliza approached, she noticed the girl clutching something tightly in her hand, a small silver charm. "Attempted suicide," Rebecca explained quietly. "Parents found her in time, but she's critical." Something shifted inside Eliza, not the familiar crush of anxiety, but a calm, focused clarity. "Let me see her chart." For the next 3 hours, Eliza worked alongside Rebecca, drawing on years of experience and the renewed perspective her own journey had given her. When the girl was finally stabilized and moved to intensive care, both doctors stepped outside, emotionally drained but satisfied with their work. "You were remarkable in there," Rebecca said, leaning against the wall. "The way you talked to her even while she was unconscious, like she could hear every word." "She could," Eliza replied simply. "At least I hope she did. The psych consult is on their way. Standard protocol." Eliza nodded, then made a decision. "I'd like to speak with the parents, if that's all right." Rebecca looked surprised, but didn't object. "They're in the waiting room." The girl's parents were huddled together on an uncomfortable sofa, their faces etched with fear and confusion. Eliza sat across from them, choosing her words carefully. "Your daughter is stable, and we expect her to recover physically," she began. "But what she's going through emotionally won't be resolved so quickly." "We had no idea she was suffering," the mother whispered. "She always seemed so together." "Sometimes the people who seem most together are the ones struggling the hardest," Eliza said gently. "And sometimes what they need most is to know they don't have to carry that struggle alone." As she spoke, Eliza felt the weight of her own words, the truth she had resisted for so long finally finding voice. She told them about resources available, about the Hartwick Center, and support groups specifically for families. What she didn't tell them was how intimately she understood their daughter's pain, how close she had come to a different outcome on that bridge. Later that evening, as Eliza prepared to leave the hospital, she found Rebecca waiting by the elevator. "That was personal for you today, wasn't it?" Rebecca asked directly. Eliza considered deflecting but chose honesty instead. "Yes." Rebecca nodded, seeming to accept this without requiring further explanation. "Some cases hit closer to home than others. That's the part of medicine they don't teach you to handle." "No," Eliza agreed, "they don't." As they rode the elevator down together, a comfortable silence between them, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in nearly 2 years, a sense of possibility. The rooftop garden of Kessler Medical Center was empty save for Eliza, who stood at the railing with a small wooden box in her hands. It was Nathan's birthday, the second one since his death, and she had developed her own private ritual to mark the occasion. The door opened behind her, and she turned to find James carrying 2 coffee cups. "Thought I might find you here," he said, offering her one of the cups. Rebecca mentioned today was significant. "Nathan would have been 47, Eliza acknowledged, accepting the coffee gratefully. "How did you know I'd be on the roof?" "Educated guess. You once told me you come up here to think." He moved to stand beside her at the railing. "Is that why you asked me to meet you to remember Nathan?" "Partly." Eliza opened the wooden box, revealing Sophia's charm bracelet nestled inside. "I've been carrying this everywhere for almost 2 years. At first because it was all I had left of them, then because I was afraid of what would happen if I let go." James watched her carefully. "And now?" "Now I think I'm ready to keep them with me in a different way." She removed the bracelet, holding it up so the silver bird charm caught the sunlight. Sophia loved birds, freedom and flight, the things every teenager craves. With deliberate movements, Eliza unclasped the bracelet and removed the bird charm. She placed it back in the box, then fastened the empty bracelet around her wrist. "I'm donating to the children's wing in Sophia's name. They're creating a music therapy program." She closed the box, her fingers tracing the worn edges. "And I'm going to scatter the charm from the bridge, the same bridge where you found me that night." "That's a big step," James said quietly. "It is." Eliza turned to face him fully. "I'd like you to come with me, if you're willing." The question seemed to catch him off guard. "Of course, but why me?" "Because you were there at my lowest point. You saw me when I was broken and didn't look away. And I think I'd like you to see this part too." She hesitated, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "I've been so focused on what I lost, I almost missed what I found." Understanding dawned in James's expression. "Eliza, I'm not asking for anything," she clarified quickly. "I just wanted you to know that you matter to me. Your friendship saved my life, in more ways than the obvious one." James set his coffee down and took both her hands in his. "You saved yourself. I just happened to be on that bridge at the right time." "I don't believe that was coincidence anymore," Eliza admitted. "Just like I don't think it's coincidence that the first patient I truly connected with after returning to medicine was a 15-year-old girl just like Sophia." "What do you think it means?" "That maybe there's purpose in pain. That surviving loss doesn't have to be the end of the story." She looked down at their joined hands. "Rebecca asked me to co-lead a new program for doctors dealing with burnout, and grief. I said yes. The sky was beginning to change color as evening approached, bathing them in golden light. On the street below, life continued. Ambulances arrived, families visited loved ones, hospital staff changed shifts. The rhythm of the medical center that had once been Eliza's entire world now felt like just one part of a larger existence. "The bridge ceremony," James said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "When were you thinking of doing it?" "Tonight," Eliza replied. "At sunset, the same time of day I was there before." "I'll be there," he promised. "And after, maybe dinner? There's a new place near the river I've been meaning to try." The invitation hung between them, weighted with possibility. Eliza thought of all the moments that had led her here, the tragedy, the pain, the slow, painstaking steps toward healing. She thought of Nathan and Sophia, of the life they could have shared. And then she thought of the life she was building now, moment by moment, choice by choice. "I'd like that," she said finally, realizing with surprise that she truly meant it. As they left the rooftop together, Eliza felt the familiar weight of grief shift within her, not disappearing but transforming into something she could carry forward into whatever came next. The silence that had once threatened to suffocate her now felt more like a space waiting to be filled with new voices, new experiences, new connections. It was enough, for today it was enough.